There's been a lot of music documentaries lately, from specific artists to festivals like Woodstock 99 and Firefest. But how about a doc based on an entire genre of music that defined an era? Streaming on Max now. Let's talk about Yacht Rock, a documentary. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my movie review for Yacht Rock, a documentary, D-O-C-K documentary, because the yacht goes in the dock. It's clever wordplay. And this is streaming on Max right now. It was directed by Garrett Price, who is not really in the directing realm. He is more of an editor, but some of the things he's edited do have music involved, including Daisy Jones and the Six, a pretty popular show recently. And so he definitely knows his way around, editing music clips together and stuff like that. So we'll see how that may help him in Yacht Rock, a documentary. But before we get there, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are one of my Dan Reviews subscribers already, thank you so much for that. Love having you guys return. But if you're not, please click that the subscribe button down below and the notification bell so you get the alerts for all my video drops. I've already reviewed a handful of these music documentaries. Sometimes in package form, there'll be like 3 or 4 celebrity docs out at the same time. So I'll sort of put them all together, actors, sports figures, musicians, whatever. But I've done Wham and Celine Dion and Taylor Swift, and there's been a handful. So this one, though, I thought kind of deserved its own video because it's been getting a lot of buzz, and it's sort of, maybe credited a little bit for reviving the music of, some acts that we've sort of forgotten about over the years, or maybe taken for granted, as this documentary explores a little bit. So anyway, you can check out all of that stuff on my homepage under the playlist section. But let's get to Yacht Rock, a documentary. So this chronicles basically the rise in the mid-70s or so of this smooth West Coast sound pioneered by acts like Steely Dan, Doobie Brothers, Toto, and Michael McDonald specifically, who had his hand in a lot of the music that was coming out of that scene. He was a part of the Doobie Brothers, but he worked very closely with a lot of other people involved in the scene, like Kenny Loggins and indeed Steely Dan. So look, I didn't realize that yacht rock wasn't even really a term until recently, and this documentary explores a little bit of that too, sort of the coining of the term. There was a YouTube video series that sort of had these little skits where the comedians involved were, portraying the people, Michael McDonald, Daryl Hall, whatever, and sort of taking a funny look at, the writing of some of these songs or whatever. But it was called Yacht Rock, and they were the people who kind of coined that term. And one of the main one of the main actors involved, or creators involved in that series, is interviewed here as well, talking about the coining of the name and the rise of that particular web series and whatever. And so it was kind of interesting because I guess it's true. I had only maybe heard about that term about 10 years ago, because shortly after that web series sort of blew up, you had XM and Sirius doing a Yacht Rock channel, and sort of everything that goes along with that. But look, yacht rock is not necessarily my scene. I was getting into popular music in the mid 80s. So, MTV was blowing up, and this documentary actually talks a little bit about how MTV in some ways signaled the death of yacht rock, because not a lot of those artists were that photogenic, like Christopher Cross and the Doobie Brothers, etc. And so that music fell a bit out of fashion. And when I was coming up, it was like Madonna, Michael Jackson, Prince, all of these people who had very interesting videos and interesting look to them, etc. And so for me, this was actually a bit interesting, because I didn't realize, how sort of incestuous, for lack of a better word, this genre was. And you'll find this, 60s rock had a similar thing where it's like, Jimmy Page would play in 3 different bands, Eric Clapton would play in 4 different bands, Steve Winwood would play with a lot of different people, and that's what we get here. A lot of people sort of Kenny Loggins going on tour with Fleetwood Mac, and then Stevie Nicks, playing on the next Kenny Loggins record, and Michael McDonald writing music with this person and singing background vocals for this band and whatever. And so it was for me a bit of an interesting look, but it's still not my favorite genre of music. I never really liked Steely Dan. In fact, I would say the only like yacht rock act I've seen in concert was just last year, 2024. I saw the Doobie Brothers, and speaking of which, Steve Winwood opened for them. And I have to say, the Doobie Brothers were awesome. I mean, Michael McDonald was with them, and they have like three different singers in the band, depending on what the era is and depending on what the song is. And they all sounded great. So that was nice to see. But for me, growing up, my most famous recollection of a band like that, specifically the Doobie Brothers, but any sort of yacht rock band, was the What's Happening episode, where the Doobie Brothers showed up and talked about the perils of bootlegging and all of that kind of stuff. I probably saw that episode long before I even was interested in popular music, so I didn't even know who the Doobie Brothers were, except for that episode, which they show a clip from in this movie, and they talk a bit about how that actually it skyrocketed their career. They interviewed Questlove for this, who talked about how, he didn't know Doobie Brothers from anything, but every black kid he knew watched What's Happening. And so the day after the episode aired, they were all talking about this band, the Doobie Brothers, and how things like that sort of got this genre into black households, because it was mostly white guys playing the music, Steely Dan, and sort of nerdy guys too, like Christopher Cross, and maybe Kenny Loggins falls into that category. But this, made it very clear that yacht rock gets its roots from R&B and these grooves and all of this sort of thing. And so that was an interesting, look at that, and to kind of chart it. And the movie also talks about who is not yacht rock, like Fleetwood Mac, for example. We mentioned them earlier here in this video. Stevie Nicks and Kenny Loggins worked together, but specifically, Fleetwood Mac, checks maybe one or two of the boxes, but not all of them. And Hall & Oates, the same thing. They were more of the Philly Motown sound and not West Coast R&B. So that was all very interesting, but I must say, that this got a bit long in the tooth. Now, it did pick up again near the end, when they were talking about how hip-hop acts of the late 80s and early 90s sort of found some of these old records like De La Soul, the Beastie Boys, and incorporated them for a new generation. And Warren G. Regulate, one of the biggest R&B songs of the 90s, interpolates one of the old Doobie Brothers records and makes it, for a whole new audience. And so that part was kind of interesting. But in the middle there, sort of the dip in yacht rock's popularity, like the early to mid 80s, when MTV came on, and Toto was one of the only bands, making really compelling videos, like Africa at the time, even though they talked about how the video was stupid, but it was ubiquitous. It was everywhere on MTV at the time. And so they sort of crested that wave a little bit longer than a lot of the other acts. That was pretty interesting. But I think this could have either been an hour-long, kind of whatever, TV documentary or what have you, for people like myself who maybe have a passing interest in yacht rock, but like music documentaries and stuff like that. Or it could have gone the longer route for really diehard fans of yacht rock, into 3 or 4 episodes of maybe an hour each, really diving into some of the bands that don't even really get talked about here. Because there are a lot, they really only focus on maybe 4 or 5 of these core acts, and they're all the ones I've mentioned. But there were a lot of other ones like Ambrosia and whatever that don't really get a lot of due here in this documentary. So it could have gone either way, maybe. I would have preferred maybe the hour-long version to this, but I know there's diehard supporters of the Doobie Brothers and all of these. Steely Dan obviously has huge fans still, that maybe, it could have been longer for that subsect of music fans. I don't know. But Donald Fagen from Steely Dan sort of steals the show at the very end of this documentary, because he hasn't appeared in it the whole time, and then we hear from him at the very end, which is pretty funny and interesting. But overall, look, this is a good look at yacht rock, certainly. But like the genre itself, I think maybe for me a little less would have been more. I leave Yacht Rock a documentary with a B-. But you can check this out now, streaming on max. All right, thank you so much for watching Dan Reviews It, and I'll see you next time.